here shortly. All right, sorry, where the mouse matters for the clicker. All right, so we're gonna be recorded. Thank you everybody for coming. It's kind of a lot, I guess, to jumping up here. Hopefully everybody online can see and hear. Let us know if you can. I have a great 90 minutes here to talk with you. We've got a good number of presenters. I'll be one of them. But just wanted to thank the folks from both the Departments of Transportation and City of Omaha coming to talk to us and all of you that have been supporting us in the Map Safety Committee role. We'll go ahead and start with introductions. I'm Jim Warner. I'm a transportation planner with MAPA. I've been leading the performance measures work that we've done here at MAPA and also leading the Safe Streets and Roads for All plan, which we plan to talk with you about today. Since Don just sat down in the front, we'll let him kick it off.
Don Butler, with the Rapid DOT, Higher Safety Engineer. Brad Dow, City Engineer, City of Melissa.
Nicholas Soma, National Safety Council.
Rachel Edge, Transportation.
Nick Gordon, traffic engineer with City of Omaha.
Jack Subcheck, Agency O'Brien, City of Omaha. Leland Jacobson, City of Bellevue, and also Clean Streets, County.
Sue Cuthbert, Communications and Outreach Department.
So is part of 2050 MAPA.
Lindsay Button, also a transportation planner in Howard.
All right, and I'll just go down the list as I see it from Zoom. Larry.
Hi, Larry Grant from Iowa DOT Traffic and Safety.
Todd.
Todd Pitzer, Douglas County Engineer's Office.
Chris.
Chris Sulbury, City of La Vista Community Development.
Travis.
Travis Holm, Iowa DOT Systems Planning.
Carlos.
Carlos Morales, Transportation and Data Manager over at MAPA.
Craig.
Greg Walker, NDOT Strategic Planning.
All right, it's changing up on me now, so I'm going to go next to Julie.
I'm Julie Harris with Mike Walk, Nebraska.
Randy.
Randy Sherping, Metro Transit Safety Director.
Sam.
Jim Sturts, Iowa DOT Systems Planning.
Vicky.
Vicki Quaid-Ferris, Vice President of Community Development for the Empowerment Network.
Tom.
Tom Everson with Keep Kids Alive Drive 25.
Matt.
Matt Cox, Council Bluffs Public Works.
I think I've got everybody, but if not, please go ahead and speak up.
Sarah Moulton, Transit Planner, Omaha Metro.
Thank you. All right. Well, thank you everybody for coming. I guess we'll keep moving on. And first, I'd like to take the opportunity to introduce Larry Grant. Larry's going to talk to us about strategic highway safety planning, and in particular, the vulnerable road user safety assessment, which they just completed. So Larry, I'll let you go ahead and share your slides.
Okay, you should be able to see it, I'm hoping. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the Strategic Highway Safety Plan for Iowa, and I'm going to touch a little bit on the VRU, the Vulnerable Road User, even though we've talked about that before, because during some of our presentations lately, there's been some questions kind of more about the data, and so I want to just touch base on that just a little bit. So just real quick, the Strategic Highway Safety Plan, you know, it's a statewide coordinated plan. Really, the framework is trying to reduce fatal and serious injury crashes on the public roadways. It does drive funding in states. It must be done every 5 years. Our rotation was actually up at the end of the year, so we published ours at the end of December, so it's good for the next 5 years. That will focus on it, but also make changes as we go throughout those 5 years, upcoming 5 years. And we really was driven by having that multidisciplinary input and data driven. And again, to address all roads, not just DOT roads. The collaboration, we look at the education, EMS, engineering, enforcement, and then the center circle is everyone, kind of putting the focus back on to the driver and to the passengers and pedestrians that are out there along the roadway. We did have engagement as we did our plan. We reached out to the MPOs, the regional meetings that they had, excuse me, the statewide meetings that they had. Also the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee reviewed them. And we had an actual advisory team for the SHSP. So we targeted in on emphasis areas. And the emphasis areas we had were 18 different ones that we felt really impacted the Iowa roadways when it came to fatal and serious injury crashes. And not only did we look at these, we did surveys with the advisory team and stakeholders to kind of get their feeling on, are we on the right track when we talk about the advisory, or excuse me, the emphasis areas. When we looked at Iowa's emphasis areas, again, these are the 18, you're going to see at the very bottom, local roads. Local roads kind of encompass almost everything except for your interstate system, or anything that is maintained or owned by DOT. And really, when you look at these emphasis areas, a fatal or serious injury crash can have multiple emphasis areas within that same crash. So you could have a speed-related crash that had an impaired driver that was driving a motorcycle. So, you know, it had those three type of emphasis areas. The one emphasis area that when we look at these crash data stats here is that when we look at distracted driving, it's very low on the list for priority, really. That is because in Iowa, distracted driving is very hard to encompass into the crash report, meaning when the investigators or the officers go out to investigate that crash, not always do they get the true facts of what happened in the crash. Drivers tend to lose their memory a little bit when it comes to why they may ran off the road or struck another vehicle. And a lot of times they'll, regardless of whether they're telling the truth or not, will lean towards that there was an animal on the roadway or something like that. So for law enforcement, it's a little difficult to prove distracted driving. And that's not just cell phones. It could be anything. It could be people in the vehicles talking to them. It could be fatigue. It could be that, you know, whether they're eating in the vehicle or whatever else is happening, reading a book in the vehicle as they're driving. So it's not just phone use, but phone use is very high when it comes to that, we believe, but they tend not to tell us that. And unless it's a fatal injury or a fatal crash and or a very serious injury crash, most of the time law enforcement's not going to be getting subpoenas on those phone records to see if the person was actually on their phone or not. So that one is low. That is very low, and that kind of comes into play as we go through our SHSP. We tied in all of our emphasis areas into the federal guidelines from Federal Highway when they talk about safe system. So when you look at the upper right corner there, that pinwheel, we tie all of our emphasis areas in, like for occupant protection or impairment involved, we tie that to the safer people component of the safe system approach. One thing that you really need to kind of focus in on when it comes to the safe system approach is that federal guideline or federal folks really kind of key in on that humans make mistakes and humans are vulnerable. And so when we talk about a lot of our strategies and initiatives, we really have to focus in on back on the drivers and the people in the vehicle with that driver, meaning not to be distracting to that driver when they're in that vehicle with them. But really, it comes back to the driver. We've made safer roads through engineering. We have safer vehicles by manufacturers with airbags, seat belts. lane assist, all the new technology that comes in a vehicle. Again, back on engineering, we've got cable barriers, rumble strips, all the safer components that we've put into our roadways. Really what it comes back to is the drivers. Back in 1970 in Iowa, we had 912 fatalities in Iowa. That was our highest ever recorded. And as we moved ahead throughout the years, what has happened? Well, we're down to 378 last year fatalities, which still we want to be zero, obviously, but it's going to be very difficult when you throw in that humans make mistakes. So from 1970 to 2023, now 2024, you know, again, we had speed limit laws taking effect. We had seatbelt laws taking effect, impaired driving laws taking effect. Law enforcement has become better at recognizing impairment when it comes to not only alcohol, but also drugs. And that's huge when it comes to detection of impairment. So really now what we're coming back to is it really comes back to the driver. What can we do to help them make good decisions, not drive impaired, you know, not drive while they're fatigued. You know, when the roadway was as bad as it was yesterday, stay off the roadway because of snow events or weather events. So with the safe system approach, not only do we focus in on the safer vehicles, those are the manufacturers, the safer speeds, the safer roads, the engineering aspect, but we're really focusing on that safer people component. So we're in the implementation and evaluation status of the SHSP right now. And what I want to do is just focus in on one little section of our SHSP, and that is, I'm just using this as an example for occupant protection, because even though Iowa has a very high seatbelt compliance rate in the mid to upper 90s, still our fatality crashes, there's 41% of our fatality crashes that were wearing seatbelts, only 41%. So the remainder of them were not. So when you look at a seatbelt compliance of in the mid to upper 90s, but yet we only have a 41% compliance when it comes to fatality crashes, obviously there's something there that we need to focus in on. So for the plan itself, for strategies, this is when you look at our plan, this is where it's going to focus in on occupant protection. So we'll give some strategies, we give some data and kind of follow up. And then what we're going to do is take those strategies and we'll monitor them throughout the 5 years, make modifications when we need to, if we need to focus in on whatever strategy we're looking at. And again, this is just an example of the occupant protection strategy. So this is the way we'll track it, reaching out to our partners, whether it's Governor's Traffic Safety Bureau or whether the Iowa DOT itself has campaigns for a particular strategy, or our local law enforcement and or even our universities that help us on the educational side or Department of Health when we're looking at getting that data from the crash and what happened to that person after the crash. So I went fairly quick through the SHSP because I would like to just touch really quick on vulnerable road user safety assessment. This year, all states were required to do a assessment for vulnerable road users. And not only do you have to do the plan, but we also had to have it signed off by the governor, which she did. Our governor did sign off on it. But really what we focus in on this one is that it identifies the risk for bicycles and ped crashes. In the future, the vulnerable road user aspect of it will be encompassed into our strategic highway safety plan. But for Iowa, since the vulnerable road user assessment was done, or it had to be done by the end of November, and our plan was to be finished in December, the VRU was obviously before it. So it's a standalone product right now, and it's on our website, and I'll give that to you at the end of the presentation. But then from here on, it will be within the strategic highway safety plan for Iowa. You know, what is the VRU? We've talked about this before with your group and others. You know, it really focuses in on that bicycle, pedestrian, personal conveyance type things such as wheelchair or scooter, skateboard and things like that. It's not a motorcycle. And so that was a little confusing for a lot of people when we talked about it. And so, especially with electronic bicycles now, electronic motorized bicycles. So any bicycle that does not exceed 20 miles an hour falls underneath that vulnerable road user component. Anything over that, then it starts to get up to the motorcycles, and then obviously that is not part of the VRU. We build off the previous statewide bicycle pedestrian systemic safety analysis that Sam Schultz and his crew did back in 2020. We looked at 7 years of data. Again, we looked at the data and got groups in to discuss this, whether it was the bike ped group and or our SHSP advisory team. What I want to focus on this is that in Iowa, and I'll just use 2022, we had 123 fatality and serious injury crashes that involved some component of the VRU, meaning a bicyclist, a skateboarder, a pedestrian. Obviously for Iowa, our pedestrians were the majority of our serious injury and fatalities in Iowa. But I do want to talk real quickly on pedestrians and really for Iowa, how we focus in on what is a pedestrian. I'm going through data from 2023 now to really kind of dive into this pedestrian aspect a lot deeper. And what we're finding is a majority of our pedestrians in Iowa that are seriously injured or fatal in crashes are not what people typically think of as a pedestrian, meaning most people think of a pedestrian as crossing a street, in that crosswalk, and then they're struck by some sort of vehicle. That does occur in Iowa, but not at the rate that you might think. As of right now, there's a great number of what we classify as pedestrians that are being seriously injured or killed just because their vehicle may have broken down for some reason, become incapacitated along the roadway. They get out of the vehicle, and once they get out of that vehicle, they are now considered a pedestrian. So we had multiple fatalities last year just for that reason, and within the same crash, multiple deaths. So for example, we had a vehicle become disabled. People from Iowa stopped to help them push it off the road. And while they're pushing it off the road, they're struck by another vehicle, and 2 people were killed in that particular crash. So not only is it the people that are with disabled vehicles, but also tow drivers, construction workers, and or DOT employees that once they're outside their vehicles, they're considered a pedestrian. So anybody that's working on the roadway and they're struck by a vehicle and are injured and or killed, those are considered to be pedestrian. We did have 2 tow operators last year, unfortunately, lose their lives because they were outside of their vehicle, working on trying to hook up to another vehicle to tow it. So I just like to point that out because most time people think it's pedestrians of just walking across the street, and we do have that, but majority of ours that are walking across the roadway, I don't mean just street, but the roadway, are normally not in a crosswalk. They're walking across the interstate, they're walking across a major highway, or they're walking across a city street, kind of that mid-street level, and not in that crosswalk. I believe we only had 2 fatalities, associated fatalities within an intersection, and 1 was only in a crosswalk, and that pedestrian actually crossed with a red light, so they were not supposed to be crossing. And the other pedestrian that was killed actually crossed an intersection without a crosswalk. So again, I just kind of want to hit that because a lot of people jump on pedestrians and think that they're those crosswalk areas. So when you take our VRU, which I'll use 2022 again, and look at that 123 serious injury crashes and fatalities, and you compare it to the rest of our serious injury crashes and fatalities for the state, you come in about 8%, 8 to 9% of all crashes were that VRU component. As long as we stay under 15% for that, we're not required to do extra programs for those type of crashes. And I will say that on average, for the nationwide, it's about 20% of all VRU fatality and serious injury crashes are, or excuse me, all crashes have that 20% of the VRU. So we're well below that 20% at about 8 to 9%. We did publish it in November of 2023. And now I just want to touch on this because we've had some questions from others throughout the state when it comes to when Iowa in our appendices looked at the data. And so we looked at this statewide data and we really focused in on roadways that are the Iowa DOT roadways, the primary roadways, and to focus in funding for ourselves to do projects and work with local agencies on those projects. And you see that you have some over in Council Bluffs area in Western Iowa. We've got some feedback that some, whether it's cities and or MPOs, RPAs, were concerned that we weren't focusing on particular components, whether it's segments and or intersections that they were concerned about mostly. So I just want to explain and stress to everyone that when we looked at the data, we didn't drill down on that local knowledge of those crashes. So yes, there could be areas, whether it's intersections and or roadway segments, that have a higher rating to focus in on. What we did is we broke it down into our DOT districts. So for example, in Western Iowa, the district, if the roadways such as, and I'll take number 2 there where it talks about Potawatomi County and Council Bluffs, those are on primary roads or a combination of a primary road and a city or county road. So that's how we focused in on having something to view and to really focus in on when it comes to those segment roadways and intersections. Now, we also looked at urban and we broke it out into rural too. So we kind of broke out both. But again, I can't stress enough that we focused in on Iowa DOT districts and the primary road system, that it had some sort of component that had an Iowa roadway, primary roadway. So if you look at whether it's Council Bluffs or Potawatomi County or whatever, and say, well, we feel that there's other areas that should have been focused in on, I can absolutely say it could be. But we, again, if it's a primary road, I think we covered them. But you could have a city and county road, or you could have a city-city intersection that may have a higher crash rate than what we focused in on. Because again, we're doing a whole statewide analysis, so we really can't drill down on that personal knowledge of those type of roadways. But we are open to work with locals, whether it's city or county, or the MPOs, RPAs, that want to focus in on something. And we are working on funding for the VRU aspect of it. And that's kind of in the process right now. I think we're looking at about $250,000 that we'll be able to put towards the VRU component. And that kind of falls into my last slide here when it comes to kind of strategies for Iowa within the VRU. And this really goes for the SHSP also, but you know, whether it's public education campaigns and look at those roundabouts, 4 to 3 lane conversions, the rapid flashing beacons, and going into the funding sources, which we would use HSIP local and some TSIP funding that's out there. And then I know you're going to talk about your Safe Streets for All. So that's your, for the federal side, some grants coming from that. So all that kind of ties in together. So I just want to touch on the VRU aspect because we did have some questions and I want to make sure everybody was kind of on the same page in that. To end, the link there, and I'll put it in the chat too, is that it's for the SHSP for Iowa and the VRU. It's on the same page and you can click on both. And again, it does have the appendices for the VRU that has all the data, about 120 some pages worth of data if you want to look at. So any questions, always please feel to reach out to anybody in traffic safety, myself or anybody else, especially when it comes to funding too. Greg Carson, was going to try to be on the call for the funding aspect, but I told him I'd take some notes, and if you have any questions, I'll make sure I'll get to them and get back to you. So does anyone have any questions? And I'll stop sharing.
Since nobody's speaking up, this is Todd Pitzer with Douglas County, and you've talked about this extensively. So maybe it's an offline conversation later, but I would be curious as to the discussion on motorcyclists not being included as vulnerable users. So if somebody could, provide me with a contact there or a way to better understand that, I would appreciate it.
Sure. And I don't know if Nebraska wants to answer that question, because every state's a little bit different when it comes to the VRU on how they view it. But for Iowa, we did separate motorcycles mostly because of the speed that they can do. When you're comparing a motorized wheelchair to a motorcycle, we're talking way different types of personal convenience. So that's really what we focused in on, was the speed of that motorcycle is so much higher, and the electric bicycles, which are getting faster, we had to start drawing those lines of what and where the brakes were when we considered to be a vulnerable road user.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I guess I'm just, as a lifelong motorcyclist, I have two vested interests here. One is as a transportation professional, and the other is as a motorcyclist. And you mentioned the cables, and the cables are a nightmare for motorcyclists. It's a really bad compromise for those of us that are on two wheels.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
I totally understand your speed differential. I guess I'm in future meetings. I'm going to do some research and talk to the American Motorcyclist Association, find out what some other states are doing. But I'm curious about a class of vulnerable user that can draw some attention to some of the things that do affect that class. I agree with you. The speeds is you have to differentiate somehow. But
and I will focus in on Iowa's from last year. We had 62 motorcycle fatalities, up from 49 the previous year. Why is that? Actually, we had a motorcyclist strike a pedestrian. They're both impaired. I have a feeling they probably knew each other, and they were both killed. So it comes back to helmets. When you look at, when I was talking about, seatbelts, 41% of our fatalities were wearing seatbelts, so the other remaining were not. That's very low. In the same way with helmets, when we were running the numbers on motorcyclists, when we look at helmets, which we do not have a helmet law in Iowa, we only had about approximately 20 to, I think it was 25 that were wearing a helmet that were killed. So just that wearing a helmet, we believe, could easily save at least maybe 10 or 15 lives. You're never going to be saved by a seatbelt or a helmet in all serious crashes. There's some that you just cannot survive. But a lot of those low speed crashes, we really think that a helmet, and that was another one of our focus on the SHSP, is to come back and try to get that helmet law back in place. So we'll see. Legislatively, it's very difficult.
I'm laughing a little bit as you say that, because as I'm sure everybody knows, Nebraska finally repealed their helmet law. So as a
I was sad to see that.
career-long member as a transportation engineer and a 15-year Motorcycle Safety Foundation instructor, I'm super unhappy that happened. But yeah, like you said, it's difficult. So thank you for those clarifications. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Todd, can you hear me?
I can.
I think clarification on that. So the definition, the vulnerable road user assessment is required for all states to accomplish. It's in federal law, and it came out of the most recent federal highway funding bill. And the VRU definition is written into law and required that. I know that originally when they looked at it, they included motorcyclists in the VRU definition, and it was pulled out at kind of the last minute before it was officially signed. And it could be because of that differential in speed, could be different countermeasures to not cause confusion. I think there's a thought that it might risk its final inclusion in the actual law. And so at this point, they just kept it to the bicyclists, pedestrians in that slower group. But I know there's been discussion nationally on research supporting better countermeasures for motorcyclists, particularly in regarding to barriers. WBM can be very risky to motorcyclists and Camden Bear as well. So I know there is a discussion on how we support motorcyclists as a different kind of vulnerable user. So that is the answer to your question. It wasn't there, it got pulled out likely because of the differential in speed.
Okay, thank you very much.
I think we'll go ahead and if you don't mind, save any extra questions, we'll collect those for Larry and move on to the next presentation. But thank you very much, Larry. Appreciate that. All right, up next, Don Butler from Nebraska Department of Transportation, Highway Safety.
I'd like to thank Larry for the great introduction on what Lone Road User Assessment is. So I'm going to be skipping some of these slides. They know how much we covered. Nebraska completed our most recent strategic highway safety plan in November of 22, so I'm not going to cover that. We added the Lone Road User Assessment as an appendix, and so I want to really spend most of our time talking about the VRU assessment that we just completed. Before I get into that,
You can hold up 2 seconds to make sure we're sharing.
yeah, before I get into that, I want to talk about 2023 in Nebraska. We had 231 fatalities. That included 6 bicyclists. That is the most bicyclists that have died on Nebraska roadways since 1998 when we had 7. And so it was more than we'd had in the 5 previous years. So it's very stunning to think about that. A whole range of them, including a 2-year-old on a bicycle that got run over, on a local street. So there's a variety of conditions and situations to deal with, but these are all human lives that we're talking, people in our community that are getting hit and killed. And so we need to do better. And just a reminder that even though we created this assessment last year, there's work to be done to accomplish improvements, take this assessment and actually make physical improvements on our communities. We're good? Okay.
I need to select the window again, Jim.
Here we go. So let's skip that. We talked about that. This is integrated as an appendix into our strategic highway safety plan. If you go to the NDOT website, look at our strategic highway safety plan, you click on that, that will open up and it'll have the VRU as an appendix. You scroll down to the bottom, it's about 30 or 40 pages at the end of this. One thing I want to note is that in the most recent update, we include a new critical emphasis for non-motorists. It's the first time in Nebraska that we have done that.
Would you be able to present from that side? Because we're getting a little audio cut in and out from the owl.
Yeah.
Perfect, thank you.
Well, thank you. So we added this in, I think part of it was the discussion nationally about the need to support VRUs. Secondly, knowing the assessment was coming, we didn't have a funding mechanism to actually use our HSIB funds directly for pedestrians and non-motorists. We can include it in intersections and other things. We want to make sure it's crystal clear that the HSIB funds could go to the outcomes from the VRU assessment. And we talked about reducing VRU fatality serious injuries. That's a big focus of this. And the reason is, just like Iowa, 8% of our fatality serious injuries are non-motorists. We are lower than the national standard, likely due to the rural urban nature of Nebraska and Iowa versus some other more densely populated locations or more Sunbelt locations with a higher percentage mode in higher percentage in these modes. But there really is a need. If we want to get to zero, we have to save every one of these lives. All 6 of those bicyclists, all the 22 pedestrians, everybody. And as I know, it's a shared responsibility. Road users, road stewards, all of us elected officials working together to get to zero. We can't just be one or the other. Can't just assume we're going to force our way out of it. We can't just build our way out of it. It takes everybody working together. And we're part of it. As Nebraska DOT, we have to be a part of that. So here are some of the safety trends that we see nationally. 76% of pedestrians are killed at night. There's something to be thoughtful as we're going through and as we looked into our data. The second thing is that it's not equal for everybody. There's equity components that we talk about, is that African Americans, Native Americans are hit at a higher proportion. Especially important for Nebraska. We have a few Native American communities in Northeast Nebraska. And so in order to get zero, we have to make sure we're supporting all of them, right? In this particular case, for our outreach, we did particular outreach with those tracks. We talked with them, talk about the unique needs of their community to make sure that we're going to get to zero, including them. So this is all the data that was considered. A lot of traditional data, crash data, roadway data. There's 2 new things I want to highlight that were added. social vulnerability, this is demographic data, and land use data. There's two things we've never considered before in our strategic highway safety plan, and we knew we needed them because they're critical for vulnerable road user safety, from what we've seen from other states. We learned a lot. So this particular slide, there's a lot going on, but the vertical is the number of crashes. We took US Census data and we broke it into certain indexes based on the CDC's Social Vulnerability Index. The one in blue is racial and ethnic minorities. Housing type is the dark green, and then the light green is socioeconomic status. And these are percentiles. So on the left is a lower percentage of low economic status, lower percent of racial ethnic background, and lower percentage of households that don't have a vehicle or are multi units complexes. So generally, the concept here is that as you become most socially vulnerable, so less economic opportunity, less likely to have a vehicle, you're more likely to have to travel around in one of these vulnerable modes, and thus more likely to get struck. So as you're more vulnerable on the right, you're more likely to get hit and killed. This is a really good piece of data for us. In this case, we know that these census tracts, this top 20%, is where we should be focusing our data. We have to wait for someone to get hit or somebody to get killed in these communities to go there first. This is huge for us. We have to wait for crashes or something else to happen. Second thing we looked at, I think it's pretty obvious, probably everyone knows this, is that most of the crashes are occurring in our urban principal others. These are mainly the highways going through urban areas. And then the minor arterials, these are not necessarily the highways, but they're major movement places, right? And generally we see slightly more VRU crashes than not. Let's see on the left, interstates, not very VRUs comparatively. This one's very messy. This is land use. This is a little bit different. I would say it's not as strong of an understanding, but there's some pretty good pieces in here. The line represents the number of crashes, and the bars representing kind of the density of those crashes. The big things we got is there's clustering, a lot of numerical clustering around parks, schools, places of worship, as well as around transit stops. And then density-wise, schools, social services, high density, very few locations, very few crashes, but a high density, as well as around transit stops. So these are places we can focus on. We know these are more vulnerable locations, higher risk, so we can go there without needing crashes to occur, right? We know they're higher risk. Reach out to the community on the survey, because as engineers, we think we know a lot, but we don't know everything. It's important to reach out to your locals and hear from the public to make sure that we're not missing something, right? We heard back, this is the best response we've ever gotten. I think when we did our strategic highway safety plan 2 years ago, we had 100 and something. So really excellent response. People that care about the safety of pedestrians and bicyclists. And the biggest takeaways were a lack or disconnected sidewalk or trail system. If it's not there, you can't use it. You're now having to make other more vulnerable no choices, right? Sidewalks and trails in poor condition, even if they are there. And then poor driver behavior. I think we hear this a lot. Speeding, talked about distracted driving that we did, failing to yield, parking, things like that. We had a really good response, a heck of a lot from this community. So thank you for everybody who went on, who responded, who told somebody else about it. So thank you. That was really important. It went into the report. So breakdown, we asked them, where are you going if you take a bicycle pedestrian mode? Recreation, that was kind of surprised me. A lot of people just go for recreation. It makes sense now that I look at land use because they got clustering around parks, right? Makes a lot of sense. The other thing, when I talk with elected officials, I like to point out the job location and shopping, right? And so if we want to make sure people can get to a job and can help out our businesses by buying there, we've got to have a better connected network for that. Because if they don't, they're going to have to make this choice between safety and whether they're going to be part of our economy, right? This is important to be thinking about. Other things, what are your concerns? We got from them, very similar to before, inattentive drivers, speeding, lack of or disconnected sidewalks, lack of lighting comes in there. So, and then wide street crossings kind of comes in there as well. That's something that didn't show up for the This is really great. We brought this in, put it into the report, thoughtful in what we want our decisions to be made. It's a lot going on here. This is kind of the crunch of the data. Essentially, urban arterials that are low volume and have a lot of lanes. So 4 lanes, low volumes, and actually it's gonna encourage speeding, right? To increase your energy into crashes. So that's one place we're gonna look at. Either through road reconfigurations or other things, or even just being thoughtful as you build our roadways, instead of building them, very wide capacity for 30 years down the road, can we wait a little bit? Build it so that, even like, we had this in Lakewood roundabout, we had a huge roundabout, 3x2 lanes, you really didn't need it today, and it was causing a lot of issues. Same thing as we're expanding our communities, we thought, well, do we really need 4 lanes now, or can we wait and make it safer until we can really have the congestion to help out with those speed changes? And the second one down there is the urban principal materials, higher volumes, they really don't work, you have to have the multi-lane facilities, but how do we support them so that there's pedestrian refuge islands or medians so people can get across those locations safely? That's 30% of our opportunity right there, just in those 2 locations. The other one, this is a combination of the demographic data and the land use data. So the 2 big areas that have the highest percentage of transit stops and parks because of the uses there. And if we focus on just those highest 20th percentile, so on that graph, the ones that were most likely to have crashes, that's 22% right there. So narrowing down, instead of looking at all of Nebraska, narrowing down to these locations, the top 20% that we can go to first. So these are places we want to look at first in improving these kind of facilities. So what do we decide to do that's different from our strategic highway safety plan? The first thing is we had 6 identified strategies. These are 5 of them shown here. Lighting, crossing markings, road reconfigurations, roundabouts, RFPs. So those all work. We know they're proven safety countermeasures. We're focusing them in these known areas based on new data. So transit, parks, schools, social services, higher social vulnerability index areas, and urban arterials. That's really what we know. So do what we're doing, do it better, smarter, more focused. And then this one came from, these are new strategies, brand new strategies, a lot here to go through. But these came from what the community wanted in our survey and what the best practices are. We heard from our other locals, what they're seeing, what's working for them, and also what other states are seeing. So leading pedestrian interval, Omaha and Lincoln are already leading on this. They've got a number of them. These are excellent. In Nebraska, we're talking about what we can do as well. And ADOT updating our pedestrian lighting standard. One thing that we looked at is that nationally 76% of fatalities are at night. We looked at our data. And about half of them were at night, but most of those were in lighted conditions. So it's very confusing. They're at night and lighted, and they're still getting hit. What we see is that it's global vehicle level illumination. It's not targeted focuses for the pedestrians and bicyclists that need them. So we need to relook at our standards, make sure that we're properly supporting all the users with our lighting standards. Connecting gaps talked about education, understanding some of the new things like RFPs and some of the leading pedestrian intervals, new tools that are going out there. How do we tell the public about that? Education for drivers. This is an ongoing thing in Nebraska. We kind of lost funding and lost our structure, and so that's a big risk as you're getting these younger drivers out there. How do you make sure that they're properly driving and not harming these vulnerable road users? Enhanced signage, some opportunities there. That kind of ties into right turn on red restrictions. There's a discussion nationally on having that operational change to better improve safety. And then the last few, these are particularly tied to those wide multi-lane urban arterials, having raised medians and pedestrian refuge islands. These are all great. These are all strategies. These are things that we want to do that we think are great. These all showed up in the vulnerable road user assessment. But putting them in the plan and a document online isn't enough. You got to actually get these things constructed. And so at the Nebraska Strategic Safety Instructor team, we're going so there's a lot of opportunities for currently for accomplishing these. So we've got Safe Streets and Roads for All we'll talk more about, creating a plan and then using those funds to actually construct things. We have our HSIP program in Nebraska, about $20 million annually that goes out for that, about 5 for grade separation and 15 available for other things. TAP, I think we put out $3 million in grants this last year for TAP. Safe routes in schools, to schools infrastructure projects, both education for that. And then recreational trails program is another mode opportunity. But that we felt wasn't enough in what we're currently doing. We want to do more. And so we're looking at creating a new specific systemic vulnerable road user safety program for Nebraska. We're going to model after the very successful transportation alternatives program that went out this last year. And so we're going to follow that same process. We're gonna use our HSIP funds, so instead of just all 15 million kind of going out competitively, we're gonna pull out about $1 million and dedicate it just to this program. The reason is that 8% of 15 is 1 million, and so we need to be putting this equitable amount of money towards that need, right? So 8% of our fatality serious injuries, 8% of our funding, right? We'll see how this goes. I'm not sure how much interest we're gonna get from locals and what that process is. But we need to do something this year. We're going to start, and we'll get feedback and refine that as we go forward. But this is a really good opportunity. Hopefully have this put together and out for application this year. That's all I have. Any questions? Thank you everybody for participating in the survey and all your feedback. It's been a great opportunity, and really appreciate the opportunity to talk today.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Right, give me 1 second and then we'll invite Jeff to talk Vision Zero.
Already, just subject, Steve Bowman, Zero Coordinator, appreciate, invite to talk about our action plans. Hopefully all of you have heard of our action plan that we just recently finished. And in end of November of last year, I'm gonna kind of just go through these extremely fast, since I'm hoping most of you just kind of at least take a look at plan. So yeah, I just want to highlight, the 206 Will Liza or boss from 2011 plan. That was the date range that we're looking at to create our 100 network. That's a little bit later. We had 27 lines lost last year. We used the Safe Systems approach to be a foundation for our action plan that we created. That obviously very data driven at the core as well. We could create key strategies. We're building up the existing success of safety projects that we've done in the past and building upon those, and doubling down on what's worked, especially roundabouts, part of the safety zones, pedestrian improvements, lighting. And yeah, the data-driven approach, we create a high-injury network based off all KSI crashes throughout the city in those 10 years, and took that data and created our high-injury networks, which prioritized our high and higher locations on how we want to look at funding and prioritizing where we put our investments. So we create our own high-injury network that accommodates all road users. We have a pedestrian high-injury network. We don't have a bicycle high-injury network. We looked into that, but we kind of made a decision that there wasn't a bicycle crash data to make a pedestrian or a bike high injury network that would actually have value for us to use. So we did not do that, just a pedestrian high-injury intersection, high-injury network. And using all those, we'll be building into our proven safety camera measures. I was talking about roundabouts, tri-plumbing programs, improved light, improved extensions. And through all that, we've come up with 25 total recommendations for us moving forward as we committed to zero by 2045. And each of those recommendations has a start year, responsible party, and projected estimated project costs. And just kind of just a quick look over those. I just kind of highlighted some that I thought kind of interesting right now. Speed management plan that's in there right now. We are looking to apply to get federal funding for, as well as our speed management plan. So we're definitely moving forward on some of these right away early on. Sport transit use, which is something that we're continually doing every year, but that's going to be a priority for us as we move forward. Driver education assistance, safe routes to school, as I mentioned, and prioritize CIP process, so really building in more of a safety focus in how we identify what projects we want to put our funding towards, and putting a much higher value on safety to bring it to a higher level of understanding that it is very important, and that's how we're going to get to our zero goals in the future. And then just we built in accountability into the plan. Didn't want this plan to be something that goes on the shelf and collects dust. So we have annual reports, more accountability to the public. I have a public facing dashboard that shows our progress as well. And then as I mentioned, annual updates. And then with annual updates, we're going to have a plan update in the near future within every 3 to 5 years. So as I mentioned, we have these priority safety projects. We have over 100 of these actually identified through our different districts in the city. And right now we are already kind of looking at over a dozen projects that we might tackle in the first year as a kickoff. And we're just starting preliminary review for a lot of those. So this is going to be kind of our thing that we're being really leaning into for this year and moving forward, is kind of identifying the best process for how to use our priority 1, priority 2, priority 3 projects early on. And then I think what we're going to see as we apply for other general grants for other projects is how can we incorporate the priority 4 and priority 5. And those are all very important, but the priority 1 and 2 are the ones where we see the most significant KSI rates that we really want to address and get those something done with those as soon as possible, because that's where we're going to see the biggest safety benefit right away. Trying to think of any other updates that we're kind of working on right now. So we're already kind of using our hydrogen networks now in our review of just general projects. We don't right now have a formal system for baking in our hydrogen networks into our overall process, making decision tree, but that's something that we're really working towards. So right now it's pretty much just me when projects come through, I'm evaluating them and looking if they're on our hydrogen network, and if they are, flagging them for further review. And right now that's working for what we need right now, but that's not the long-term solution. What we need to have, we need something that's permanent, that really everyone in public works, everyone in planning, everyone in police has access to, and can make that connection. And it doesn't be just one person or one department to be able to figure out, hey, we're doing something over here. We've got a project that actually ties into that. How can we both work together to accomplish what we're trying to get to, which is safety for all users. On that note, that's kind of pretty much it as far as the update. Like I said, we're moving forward with this. We have 11 year 1 projects, and like I said, we've got 2 of those recommendations that we're going to be pursuing federal funding. And then there's other ones where it's pretty much we're just I have 8 other kickoff meetings that are scheduled that are coming up in the next month. So yeah, the ball's rolling pretty fast on a lot of this. So we're encouraged.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate that. Any questions for Jeff? Thank you.
I have a quick question for both Don and Jeff. Would you be able to provide your slides to the rest of the group and those online?
Yeah.
Awesome.
All right, thank you very much. Hopefully everybody online is seeing my safety target slide.
Yeah, that's good.
That's good. All right, so shifting gears here, this is really the map safety committee's been meeting for about the past 5 years, and this is what we primarily focused on. So I'm going to talk through really quickly. MAPA sets our own federal safety targets, and so we're going to go through kind of that process. And Lindsay will finish off kind of tying into how we're preparing for Safe Streets Road and Roads for All planning here in a couple months. So again, when we plan for safety targets, we're looking at all public roadways within the Mapa region within our transportation management area. So Douglas and Sarpy County and the urban area within Potawatomi County. So PM1 is just, we have an acronym for everything. So PM1 is measures of safety that we're looking at. These are 5-year rolling averages. I'll go through some slides, but really kind of want to hit those highlights up front. There are any number of ways to look at trend analysis. We look at generally a linear trend for the last couple of years. For the first number of years, last year and this year, we're also looking at a policy-based adjustment, and really we're just tying ourselves to what would it take to get to 0 fatalities and serious injuries by 2040. Our baseline here on that 5-year rolling average is 2018 through 2022. And when we talk about rates, we're talking about fatalities or serious injuries per 100 million vehicle miles traveled. And all the measures here on the left, we'll go through those individually. Again, a high-level overview, we make use of crash data from Iowa and Nebraska Departments of Transportation. We use vehicle miles traveled from our traffic report. And we're measuring progress again with those proposed policy targets. You're the first look, other than, kind of internal MAPA. We'll bring it to our technical transportation committee here in next week already. And then we'll take it to the board for approval. And these targets are ultimately sent to Iowa and Nebraska DOT and their federal highway local offices. To note, we don't incur a penalty. We don't meet these targets, but we definitely do like to take the opportunity to talk with all of you through our process. And I think we're where we are today and ready for safe streets and roads for all because we've been looking at this. So I think it's been a useful process for that alone. All right, very quick overview. The blue bars themselves are the individual number of fatalities, or when we get to serious injuries, of course, that number as well. The dark blue line there is that trend. That's that 5-year rolling average over time. And again, that would be our measure and corresponding target. Highlighted in green is that baseline period that we're looking at. So those are those 5 years worth of data that we're averaging in to get that trend line. The red line would be if we were to stick with a purely linear trend. So in this case, if we set our targets based upon that, we'd be acknowledging that the fatalities go up, and we're not doing that. A couple things to note, you'll see that the circle and the star there are our projection, which is 2023. So what we've just finished, but we've not evaluated yet in 2024 is that target. They're bumped up a little higher, and they were bumped up the last couple of years, really to get us on a glide slope to 0. So just how we basically set it to a binomial function. So it started high and it's coming down low, but to note, we're going down and we're going to continue doing that. So our targets will be decreasing from now on, acknowledging if we don't see that initially, but that's our goal. A couple things to note, the fatality data for 2022 from Nebraska is preliminary, but we'll be getting that data shortly and continuing to incorporate that. Regional vehicle miles traveled. So again, we use traffic data, traffic counts that are taken in local jurisdictions, continuous counters on our roadways, give us data and we pull that together. We also make assumptions for local roads. As I'm sure you're all well aware, we're building a lot of local roads. So we've made an assumption from 2019 through 2022, looking at about 91 centerline miles of growth on these local roadways. We want to get more precise than that. So we are working with Nebraska in particular for some updates to roadway data otherwise for safety planning. So we're excited to kind of be able to take better stock of what are those numbers, but also where are these crashes occurring in jurisdictions, being able to make use of that as well as MAPA. And then we make an estimate here for growth from 2022 through 2025. About 1% a year, and that's really just based upon what Nebraska and Iowa are seeing on their continuous counter. So it is just that, it's an estimate. Fatality rates, we've taken all those numbers that we came up with from our fatalities, And we're applying that BMT that I just showed you. So this isn't an estimate. This is just if we took those numbers that were our targets from the previous slide, here's where they would line up. A couple things to note on rates. You can of course see that there's a huge spike there in 2020. That's when BMT was way down. So therefore, of course, fatality rates would go up. And there's some balancing things here. This is good to have a rate measure because then you're talking apples to apples between organizations, but we do see part of our other planning is to find travel by other modes, reducing that time or that distance that people do have to travel. So it's useful, but I don't think that this will be a priority focus as we look at these individual targets. Serious injuries. And this is kind of what was useful in going through this process. Again, that linear trend has been on the downward slope, both in nationally as well as across the state in Nebraska and Iowa, but for us in particular. And this is one of those where it's nice to see, if you want to say, can we get there or not, that for right now anyway, that slope that we're seeing both measured and our targets fit on that linear trend. And then corresponding serious injury rate, not much more to note here other than rates also don't turn as quickly because of how the numbers are working. So those values are a little bit higher above the curve. But at the end of the day, we're not chasing those injury rates. We're really getting to zero on fatalities and serious injuries. And finally, non-motorist fatal and serious injuries. These don't have a corresponding rate because we don't have a measure of exposure or travel. And those numbers are there. Just interesting things to note. We somehow, and I'm not quite sure how you account for it, did not see the huge spike that nationally did occur in 2020. And we've stayed generally lower, but with the exception, as Don noted, 6 bicyclists. A number of those were within our region, and we'll be thinking about that as we look at our planning as well as pedestrians. So where were we when we look at progress to date? We did meet the target, and then another measure we look at is better than baseline, and that just shows that you're having improvement. And we were fortunate enough to do both of those through 2022. And finally, what we're proposing to this group, and be interested in any comments or thoughts that you have. These are targets for the MAPA region for 2023. In 2024. So that projected value is acknowledging what we estimate happened last year, and then 2020 targets for this year in 2024. Any questions or thoughts? It does make it easier this year and last year, but now in particular, we're so close with Safe Streets is we know where we want to go, right? So I mean, those numbers that we came up with for projected and targets, you could manipulate how quickly those fatality and serious injury rates go down, but eventually you've got to get to zero. So that does give us something I think more useful to track rather than just kind of looking at trends. So. All right. Well, that was a pretty simple, good. This used to be the bulk of the discussion. Boring graphs. So this is good. I'm happy to turn it over to Lindsay, and hopefully as we get through those slides, there might be time if there's any additional questions for the previous presenters as well. Yeah, Leland.
Yeah, thanks. One quick question on your statistics up there. Goals is that you threw up basically Calgary, Douglas, and part of Iowa, your focus area. Inside that area, you're making any distinction between suburban, urban, and rural?
Yeah.
Below these numbers.
So we hadn't been, other than what the local individual jurisdictions do themselves, but that's really the gist of what Lindsay's going to talk about next. That's what that focus of Safe Streets is. Safe Streets can go wrong. So with that.
You're already on my side. All right, so thanks a lot for coming. Reminder, I'm a transportation planner with NAPA. I'm kind of second to Jim on this Safe Streets and Roads for All program. I'm sure most of you are kind of already aware that last year we received federal funding under the Safe Streets and Roads for All program. So since then, we've gone through and set up our program agreement with Federal Highway, and we've also put out RFQs, and we've been working on finding a consultant to help us with this planning effort. So what I'm going to be doing today is just kind of giving you guys a bit of an update and letting you know how we're hoping to use the NAPA Safety Committee as part of our planning structure for this effort moving forward. So I'm not going to go over it again. I think Jeff and Larry and Don all did a great job kind of outlining the safe systems approach. The main point here is that the goal of our safety action plan is to take a holistic approach, looking at our entire region, to put together a well-defined strategy to prevent roadway fatalities and serious injuries. And this is going to be using the safe systems approach. So the objectives are outlined around the outside of that diagram, and then those key policies are kind of in the middle there. The main takeaway, as we've been talking about so far, is that no death, no serious injury is acceptable on our roads within our region. So for this study, we're looking at our TMA, which is kind of the same area that Jim pointed out in performance metrics with one. So instead of doing all of urbanized Potawatomi County as we do for our performance measures, we are only looking at the larger cities in that area. So that includes Crescent, Council Bluffs, McKellar-Welland, and Carter Lake, which is where we are today. So the reason for that is there was another application that went through the 97 counties in Iowa, and they're going to be looking at that more rural perspective and using those county roads. So we're going to be focusing more on the cities in our area. So a quick overview of what's in a comprehensive safety action plan. It's going to start out with us developing a region-wide safety assessment of crashes and fatalities and serious injuries on our local roads. From that safety assessment, we'll be able to develop prioritized projects and lists of recommended policies that we can use to kind of help reduce that number down to 0. And this plan ultimately is going to support our jurisdictions in applying for that implementation funding, whether that be through the Safe Streets and Roads for All implementation funds, or through Nebraska HSIP, or through the funding streams we have in Iowa as well. Ultimately, having this plan as something to back you up is going to kind of help with receiving those implementation dollars. And that list of projects, we're going to be making sure that we focus on things that are regionally applicable, so something that can be implemented at a number of different areas across our region, and focusing on those low cost, high impact solutions and strategies. So what exactly is a Safe Streets and Roads for All safety action plan? So we are required for our grant to have these 8 components within our safety action plan, and I'll kind of go through each of these in a little bit more detail to give you guys some background on what's going to be involved in this planning process. The first one here is leadership commitment and goal setting. What that ultimately means is we need to have high-ranking public officials sign on to this plan and commit to these goals and things of that nature. So this has been ongoing since we applied for our grant back in fall of 22. Fall of 22 is when we applied. And part of that application process was soliciting letters of support from major jurisdictions within our study area. So we've received 9 letters of support from member jurisdictions that I've got listed up there for you. And our MAPA board committed to this goal that we have here of reaching 0 fatalities and serious injuries by 2040. So coming up during plan development, what we're going to be doing is meeting one-on-one with these jurisdictions again, kind of making sure that everybody is up to date and kept informed on kind of the progress that we're going through and where we're at in the planning process, to reaffirm that leadership commitment, and ultimately with the goal of having those jurisdictions adopt this plan once it's completed. So this is an ongoing effort underway, which kind of includes this meeting that we're having here today with you as a safety committee, is our planning structure. And I'm actually going to come back to that at the end here. We're going to go through the other components to round out what the plan is, so that you all know what you're getting, we're trying to sign you up for, I guess. So over the next year, once we have finalized our contracts with our consultant groups, we're going to be looking at these remaining 6 aspects of safety action. So first there is our safety analysis, and as I mentioned, that's examining our local roadways, looking at state data, both from Nebraska and Iowa, as well as any other data sources we can find locally, from the various jurisdictions to outline where these crashes are happening, various components that are contributing to these crashes, and kind of using that as our baseline framework for what we're going to work from moving forward. The next place is looking at engagement and collaboration in tandem with our equity considerations. And we've kind of started this work a little bit already. We've been reaching out to community partners and advocacy groups and kind of making sure that they're aware that this planning effort is going forward and looking to partner with them in our engagement and outreach, so that we're meeting people where they are, making sure that we're listening to the voices of those historically underserved communities. We know that that's been a very big push in a lot of federal planning efforts recently for very good reason. A lot of the impacts are often within those communities, so we want to make sure that they're included in the planning process and their voices are heard throughout. But it's also going to involve working with our safety committee, working with our technical transportation advisory committee, and working with just the public as a whole. So that's going to be a very big lift. And to kind of make sure that we are allocating the amount of time that we need to make sure that this is an important, not overlooked part of our plan, is we've kind of split out our consultant work into a data side and a plan development and outreach side. So that way we're making sure that we're devoting the necessary resources to kind of bump up that engagement effort. So these are kind of all done simultaneously. We'll also get to that policy and process changes. So what that's going to involve is kind of looking at existing safety policies, existing safety plans, and kind of taking that inventory and seeing how we might want to try to change some of those policies to help us in our goal of reaching zero. Ultimately, then we're going to strategize and create a list of projects that we're going to prioritize based on that high impact, low cost framework, making sure that it's regionally applicable. And then throughout, we're going to focus on this progress and transparency. So the plan actually defines this as only really being, make sure you have an update meeting like a year after your plan is finished, right? But we want to make sure that we have like an interactive website that people can look for. In a perfect ideal world, we're not sure if we'll get to it, but we would love that to be kind of like a real-time update on how our crash rates are looking and what projects we're currently working on, what's being implemented and things like that, to try and make the plan as transparent as possible. So back on this planning structure piece. Our planning structure involves two key pieces, first being our project management and the other being our consultant teams. So our project management consists of our project team, which is us over at MAPA, which is Jim, myself, Rachel, Carlos, and finance and all that other fun stuff. So we're the behind the scenes admin pushing this whole thing forward, right? And then we have TTAC, which is our Transportation Technical Advisory Committee, and they're going to kind of serve the role as technical advisors for this plan. And again, we'll make sure that they are updated as we go, and we're hearing from them and their perspectives to get at that technical side of the planning structure. And then the safety committee, which is you guys and everybody online here today. And we're going to use you ideally as our community and stakeholder group. So providing that unique perspective from the community, from your organizations, to make sure that we're hitting that as well. I already mentioned that we split out our consultant teams. Schedule-wise, those contract negotiations are underway. We're working on a pretty rapid timeline for those. We're trying to hit finalization on those contracts by our board date in February. So that's the goal there. So the role of the MAPA Safety Committee, we're kind of looking to expand this out a bit more from just our annual performance measures meetings that we've been having for the last several years. What we're going to ask from all of you kind of moving forward into this planning process is for your input on key safety issues, strategies, and projects that we want to make sure are addressed in the plan and included in our project list and our strategy list. We're going to bring to you those baseline metrics from our data team alongside with some of the things that we hear from the community in our outreach and engagement processes, so that you can kind of validate that safety data and our outreach findings and make sure that we're on the right track, maybe what kind of needs to be prioritized and what maybe not. And then generally it's just overall oversight of plan development, implementation of the plan once it's completed, and kind of monitoring on that progress and how we're doing towards reaching our goals. So a couple ways we want to do that. The first one here is we're looking to potentially increase the membership of the safety committee. So this is kind of including just basically all of our safe system stakeholders. So historically, that's kind of looked at the 4 E's, if everybody's familiar with those. Those are engineering, enforcement, education, emergency services. Iowa actually has a 5th E that includes everyone. So we want to kind of make sure that we're getting all of those perspectives into our safety committee as best as we can. So that includes things like public health departments. We'd want to try to reach out to the Iowa Governor's Traffic Safety Bureau, local law enforcement, the Nebraska chapter of National Safety Committee, and first responders to kind of hit at all of those safe systems wedges in that infographic we did before. We're also kind of looking to cross-cut that a little bit and coordinate with local universities and professors and such that are looking at traffic safety and kind of providing that other perspective as well. So up until this point, Rapid Safety Committee has met about once a year. Because this is a pretty involved planning process, we're gonna be upping those meetings. So we could have as many as 6. We're gonna kind of feel it out as we go. We haven't put together our engagement plan yet, so it's in the works. And to kind of get at that, we'll do this first quick. So this is kind of just a draft schedule of what we're looking at for the upcoming year and a half or so. So as I mentioned, we're trying to get our consultant contracts finalized by February, which means that they'll kind of start work mid-March. And that effort is going to go through until June of next year, so June of 25. We've got project kickoff in March, primary project work being conducted through till about April of 25, and then plan completion in April. The reason that it extends from April then to June is because we want to have our consultants on board to help jurisdictions with developing their implementation grant applications. So that's going to be another key step, kind of taking it past just the plan is finished and making sure that we're hitting that implementation piece. So back on the role of the safety committee, we kind of wanted to get your guys' input while we've got you trapped here today on how much you want to be involved in this process, what kind of commitment you're willing to do, and how it's best for us to keep you updated and keep you informed on what's going on. So for that, we have a Menti poll. We just love Menti polls. I'm just gonna pull this one up quick here. If you can all get your phones out, and those of you online, hopefully you have your phone available to you as well. I've got the instructions up here. You can scan that QR code, or you can just go to menti.com and enter in the numbers that are shown there on the screen. So I will give everybody a minute to get logged in there. And you should just have a page pop up that says instructions and gives you the option to thumbs up if you want. So you give me a thumbs up once you get there, then I'll know how many people are online so far. Perfect. How many people have online?
We had a few.
15 online.
Hey, Lindsay, there's a question or more of a comment from Sarah Moulton online.
Okay.
I am happy to read it for everyone's enjoyment. Should we also be considering DEI involvement?
Sorry, it's a little hard to hear you in the room here. Should we also be considering which involvement?
I don't know.
DEI involvement?
DEI. Oh, like disabilities and stuff?
Diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Right, diversity, equity, and inclusion. 100% absolutely. So I would say that Sarah, if you want to continue joining our safety committee, that would be fantastic. We're also going to make sure we want to hear those voices in a lot of our public engagement efforts, I think, for sure. But that's a group that also we want to make sure we're hitting, absolutely. All right, so we got about 15 people in our Menti here, so let's go to our questions. All right, so first one here, are you interested in participating in Safe Streets and Roads for All planning activities? Everybody can select their option and hit submit. Kind of a base question. I'm hoping that most people are interested in participating, given that you're a part of the safety committee, but You never know, it's an anonymous quiz, if you really don't wanna be involved, that's fine too. Great, okay, 100% yes, love it, love to see it, great. So our next question here, are you willing or able to attend safety committee meetings more frequently than the current annual schedule to support this plan and development? I had a question up here earlier that was kind of a little more detailed in how many meetings per year, but I think we kind of need to iron that out a little bit more. We don't want to overwhelm people with too much at once. No, that's fine. We will also be having our annual meeting, so that works. Perfect. All right, thanks guys. Next one, would you prefer these meetings to be in person or virtual? I know especially days like today, it's kind of helpful to have that virtual option, given that the weather can be a little unpredictable for sure. All right, looks like you like overwhelmingly hybrid votes. Perfect. Okay, so I think this is our last one. This is what we call a ranked choice voting question. So this one is going to ask what is the best way for us to keep you updated on safe streets and planning activities. You've got 5 options there. You can kind of drag and drop into order of priority for you. So your best one being your first choice, your second best option being your second choice, and so on and so forth. So you want to drag those in your order of preferred methods and then submit. I always like watching this one. It's kind of just interesting to see where the bars go and how it pops up there. Yeah, we've got 10 responses, we're waiting about 4 to 5 more. I think that's everybody. Great, okay, well, thank you guys so much. I think that was our last question. So we'll make sure that we look at those kind of moving forward and incorporate them into how we structure these meetings moving forward. We're definitely gonna increase the number of those meetings. We'll try to make them, we'll make sure that they're hybrid so that everybody has the option. And I'll just pull our presentation back up here. All right. So honestly, that's all I had for you guys today. So if you want to take a look at the website, that's the address right there. If you have any questions, you want to email, that's the best email to use to get a hold of us from the project team. Otherwise, if you have any questions in the room. Comments, concerns? Any questions online that I'm not seeing in the chat? Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you. I did want to make one point. So as things go, and this is for jurisdictions in particular, if there are things that you need to have planned and you think you'd want to do something quicker than maybe that schedule has, we definitely do want your input throughout the Safe Streets planning process. For Iowa in particular, there are just a lot of state funded safety opportunities, but with what Don has offered today for multiple road users, even if we work on developing those applications in parallel, it helps us prepare you rather than waiting for that last tail end of the plan. So we're very excited to be able to bring things to you, your input throughout the process. It's appreciated to make sure that we get the product that works for everybody. All right. Any last comments online, or you're good to go? Okay, we'll follow up with this. We'll have copies of the slides, and as we build out our website for this material, we'll share that as well. Thank you.
I think that's all we've got for you guys today. Cool. Thanks so much for coming. Thanks so much for everybody joining online. And let us know if you've got any questions that come burn into you after the fact, and otherwise I think we're good. Thanks, guys.
You have the slides.
Okay. Okay, that, yeah, I did.
I mean, so it's mostly the guy that myself.
Oh, yeah.